The Scouting Party, Book 18. It was dawn in the Glen Macfuzz. The first faint rays of daylight were streaming down from the morning sun. At first, nothing moved. Windbag was still sitting on his stool in the sentry box. His blunderbuss had dropped to the ground. He was fast asleep and snoring loudly. The rest of the clan were locked inside their houses. They were all sleeping soundly. Soon a hungry cockerel came prowling round the sentry box. It was looking for some food for its morning meal. Clucking and squawking, it scratched at the dirt with its long claws and pecked at snails and beetles with its sharp beak. Suddenly it saw Windbag. Windbag, who was still asleep, snored very loudly. The cockerel arched its neck and flapped its wings. With a loud squawk, the big bird took off. Flying clumsily, it landed on top of the sentry box. It looked all round the glen. Everything was quiet. Arching its neck again, the cockerel looked up at the sky. The sound went ringing round the glen. Windbag sat up with a jerk. His eyes shot open. "Stop!" he said sleepily. "Who goes there?" He yawned and rubbed his sleepy eyes. Stretching his arms, he stood up to have a look around. At first, everything seemed to be all right. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Windbag saw a heap of dirt next to the wall. Turning quickly, he went across to get a better look. Now he could see the Snagron's tunnel. "Good Lord," he said to himself, "something has found its way in." Then, shouting as loudly as he could, he ran back towards the houses. "Get up, everyone! Get up quickly! Something's happened! Someone's raided us! Please, be quick! Come out here!" He went darting round all the little houses, beating on the doors and walls. But nobody stirred. Everyone was far too sleepy. Windbag got angry. He dashed back to the sentry box and picked up the blunderbuss, which was still loaded with gunpowder and bullets. He shut his eyes and slowly squeezed the trigger. Boom! What a row! The sound went crashing round the hillsides. All the members of the clan came bursting out of their houses. They were all yawning sleepily and scratching their heads. They all came crowding round Windbag, and as quickly as possible he explained about the tunnel. "I'm awfully sorry," he groaned at last. "I tried my best, but I knew I'd make a mess of it. I should stick to playing my bagpipes. That's the only thing I'm good at. I can't do anything else." "Well, it's no good moaning and groaning about it," Macfuzz said firmly. "There are more important things to do. Firstly, we must make sure that no one is missing. Everyone wait here for a bit, and I'll go and get the list of names I made out yesterday." He rushed into his house and got the list from the drawer in his desk. Coming back out into the glen, he said, "Right then, answer me as quickly as you can, and I'll mark you down." He began to read aloud. "Angus."
"Yes, I'm here."
"Ben."
"Present and correct, sir."
"Colin."
"Yes, I'm here."
"Don." There was no answer. Everything was silent. "Does anyone know where Don is?" asked Macfuzz quietly. Everyone looked round in dismay. Don was nowhere to be seen. It was a puzzle.
"Maybe he's still asleep,"
said Angus, and he went across to Don's croft. When he came out, he was frowning.
"Don's gone,"
he said sadly. Hilda started to cry.
Come on, old girl.
said Big Ben, and he put his arm round her and led her away to her croft. They looked all over for little Don. They called out his name until their throats were dry. But it was no good. Don had vanished. MacFuzz scratched his head and frowned at them all.
I think it's time we held a meeting,
He said at last.
It's too cold out here. Let's go into my house.
So everyone crowded into MacFuzz's house. When everyone had found a seat, MacFuzz began to speak.
Well,
He said,
I think we must all agree that Don has been caught by the Snagron. She'll have tricked him somehow and dragged him away. We must all pray that she hasn't hurt him. The question is, how are we going to set him free?
Tosh raised his hand.
Can I say something?
He asked. MacFuzz nodded his head.
I think we should send out a small scouting party.
He said,
Just one or two of us. We should be able to sneak down into the Glen of Gloom and snoop around without being seen. The main thing will be to see just where Don is. But if we can set him free, we should try our best. If we can't, we should come back here and inform the rest of you. Then we can work out some sort of plan.
MacFuzz sat and thought about this. At last he nodded in agreement.
Yes,
He said,
that sounds like a reasonable plan. But who is willing to risk another visit to that horrible glen?
Every single one of them raised their hands.
Well,
Said MacFuzz,
I'm very pleased that so many of you want to help. Don is very lucky indeed to have so many faithful friends. But if too many of us go, the Snagron will spot us easily. We'll have to draw straws.
So MacFuzz got out a handful of straws. He took one straw and cut it through the middle. Now he had lots of long straws and 2 shorter straws. He held them in his hand and made sure that all the tops were level. Now nobody could tell where the short straws were.
Right then,
Said MacFuzz.
I want everyone to pick a straw. If you get a short straw, you will go on the scouting trip to the Glen of Gloom.
Everyone was silent as he held out the straws. Big Ben had the first go. He pulled out a long straw. Windbag had the second go. He pulled out a long straw. Jock had the third go. He pulled out a short straw. Now it was Angus's turn. He pulled out a long straw. Tosh went next. He pulled out a short straw too.
Yippee!
He shouted.
It's you and me, Jock. Well done,
Said MacFuzz.
Now there isn't much time, so you'd better get ready.
Jock and Tosh rushed off to their crofts. Tosh was ready first, but Jock took his time. He was sorting through the things in his chest of drawers and choosing lots of different objects to carry with him. He didn't know exactly what he would need, so he sorted out as many things as possible. Soon his pocket was so full that it looked as if it would burst. At long last, he was ready.
Come on then,
He said to Tosh.
stop hanging about. It's time we were off.
The chief came out to see them go.
Good luck,
He said,
and don't forget that the Snagron may be waiting for you, so keep a sharp lookout. Yes, we will,
said Tosh, and the 2 friends went across to the wall and clambered up the wooden ladder. As quickly as they could, they crossed the River Mac and went up into the fir trees. By now the sun was well up in the sky, and its bright rays were beating down on them. Soon the 2 fuzzbuzzes were feeling hot and thirsty, but they kept going, and before long they had reached the top of the last hill. Now they were standing on the outskirts of the Glen of Gloom. Before they went any further, they stretched out on the green grass and looked down into the glen. They looked for a long, long time, but the Snagron was nowhere to be seen.
Come on then, said Tosh. We can't stay all day. or else we'll never get Don out.
Crouching down, they began to creep slowly along the crooked footpath. It was hard to go slowly because the path was as smooth and steep as a slide, and their feet kept slipping. When they reached the prickly bushes, they stopped. They were beginning to feel frightened. They were sure that the bushes would try to trap them, but this was the only way in. They started to crawl, praying that nothing would happen. They crawled very, very slowly, keeping to the middle of the pathway, as far away from the thorns as possible. The bushes didn't even stir. The two friends couldn't understand it. They were in the thickest part of the bushes now. It got darker and darker, and they began to shiver with the cold. Hardly breathing, they crawled on and on, until suddenly they saw daylight again. They had made it! The bushes hadn't moved at all. They crawled out into the sunlight and stopped for a short rest. Now that they had got through the prickly bushes without coming to any harm, they felt a lot better. The rest of the trip should be easy.
Come on,
said Tosh.
we mustn't dawdle. It will be night soon.
They set off again. But if they had only turned round and looked back up the path, they would not have felt so pleased. The prickly bushes were stirring from their sleep. Very slowly and silently, the thorny branches began to sway. Twisting and stretching, they were reaching out across the pathway. They began to curl and slide round each other, forming a thick tangle of curving thorns. Before long, the pathway had vanished. The bushes had formed a solid wall, stretching right across the glen. Jock and Tosh did not know it yet, but they were trapped. The Glen of Gloom was like a fortress, with no way in and no way out. By now, the two friends were crawling past the jagged rocks. Jock was trailing behind. His hands and feet were hurting. His throat was dry, and he felt worn out. And on top of all that, he hadn't felt so frightened for years. Further down the pathway, Tosh was looking for somewhere to hide. At last he crawled down as far as the last big mound of rocks. He waited for Jock to catch up with him. Keeping well hidden, the two fuzzbuzzes inspected the glen from end to end. They looked into all the dark corners to make sure that nothing was lurking there, waiting to swoop down on them. Everything was still and soundless. The bright sun was still in the sky, but the bottom of the glen was cold and gloomy. Jock was looking hard at the brown and twisted tree.
Where's the cave gone?
He whispered.
That's funny,
said Tosh.
There should be an opening next to the tree.
The two fuzzbuzzes strained their eyes to see.
I know
what's happened, said Tosh. The cave is behind the tree. Look, you can see some dark patches between the branches. Squinting his eyes, Jock looked even harder. Yes, Tosh was right. Somehow the tree had stretched across the front of the cave.
Why has it done that?
He asked.
I bet I know,
said Tosh.
The branches have moved sideways to form the bars of a prison. Somebody must be shut inside there, and I bet it's little Don.
He crouched down and picked up a small round pebble. Slowly he took aim, and then he hurled the pebble as far as he could towards the mouth of the cave. The two fuzzbuzzes ducked behind their rock. The pebble crashed against one of the branches of the tree and then fell to the ground with a loud rattle. The fuzzbuzzes peeped out. Very faintly, they could see something moving towards the mouth of the cave. For an awful second, Tosh thought that they had disturbed the snagron. But the snagron was a dark colour, and this thing seemed to be white. At last, it dawned on Tosh that Don had vanished in the middle of the night. He probably still had his white nightgown on. Without thinking, he jumped up and shouted,
Don, Don, it's all right. We've come across to get you out.
and he went hurtling across to the cave. Behind the rock, Jock was so frightened that he nearly passed out. He expected the Snagron to come rushing out at any second. With a groan, he shut his eyes and counted to 30. Nothing happened. Slowly he stood up. As quick as a flash, he darted across to the cave, where Tosh was pulling and tugging at the branches with all his power.
You silly clown,
hissed Jock.
I was sure we'd had it then.
Tosh scowled at him.
Don't be daft,
he said.
The Snagron is a coward. She's frightened of us, and she's staying out of our way. Come on, give me a hand to move these branches.
Inside the cave, Don thought he was dreaming.
Who's there?
he asked quietly.
It's me and Jock,
said Tosh.
Thank goodness we found you.
He looked at Don's torn nightshirt.
What has the Snagron done to you?
he asked angrily.
Has she been tormenting you? Has she harmed you? No, not yet. But she plans to,
moaned Don.
And she treats me like dirt. And it's awfully spooky in here. Please get me out as quickly as you can. Well, we're here now,
said Tosh.
And we'll try our best to set you free. It's a pity that we didn't bring some of the sharp saws we used to build the wall yesterday. If we had the proper tools, we could cut through this wood in no time.
Jock groaned. Why hadn't he thought to put a saw in his pocket? He could have kicked himself. The 3 fuzzbuzzes pushed and pulled the branches until their hands were red raw, but it was no good. The branches were solidly locked together. Jock looked upwards. The sun was vanishing behind the mountain peaks, and it was plain to see that night was drawing in. It would soon be dark.
If we want to get away today, we must try harder,
he said.
Come on, boys, let's get working.
No sooner had he said these words than a horrible gurgling sound came from behind them. Turning round, the 3 fuzzbuzzes looked in horror at the green pool. It was starting to bubble and foam and spout up. A shower of filthy green water went squirting up into the sky and then came raining down onto their heads. A foul smell drifted across the glen. As the fuzzbuzzes trembled in terror, a horrible green arm rose up from the foaming water. The green skin had ugly blotches all over it. These blotches were a purple colour. The fuzzbuzzes could see a terrible hand stretching out from the end of the arm. It had 6 long fingers. On the end of each finger was a curved yellow claw. There was a blood-chilling sucking sound. Then another green arm rose slowly out of the swirling water. Little by little, some sort of horrific monster was stirring from its long sleep in the depths of the green pool. The fuzzbuzzes gasped as a frightful green head floated slowly upwards. 2 angry yellow eyes looked across at the cave. The monster snarled at them, its lips parting to display thousands of needle-sharp teeth. It still came upwards. Before long, all of its body was above the water. The fuzzbuzzes could see that the thing didn't seem to have a neck. It was difficult to tell where its head ended and its round, fat body began. Its legs, like its arms, were short and powerful, and it seemed to float on top of the water on 2 big webbed feet. Apart from the Snagron, it was the nastiest animal the 3 fuzzbuzzes had ever seen. It looked like a horrible cross between a toad and a lizard. As the terror-stricken fuzzbuzzes looked on, the water on top of the pool swirled, bubbled and foamed once again. Now a second green beast rose slowly upwards from the filthy water. The two monsters croaked and gurgled at each other. Then they bounded onto the muddy banks. They stood there for a second or two, soaking wet and dripping. Then, suddenly, they dashed across to Tosh. Snarling and croaking loudly, they grabbed him. They snatched an arm each, and for the next 30 seconds it looked as if they were trying to pull him apart. They were like two dogs fighting over a bone. Then, suddenly, they stopped their fight and looked towards the pool. The green water had begun to swirl and foam up again, and something else was coming up. But this time, a long, long body came shooting upwards. It was the snagron. Strands of purply-brown weed were hanging from her body. She slithered onto the bank and shook herself. The weeds fell to the ground in a spray of dirty green water. She looked across at the two monsters and hissed, "My good and faithful servants, I'm very pleased to see you. Have you done as I asked? Have you caught any snoopers?"
"Hail, your majesty,"
said the bigger of the two animals.
"we have caught two snoopers. What are your orders? Shall we kill them now?"
The snagron chuckled. "No," she said. "I want you to look after our visitors. I want you to make them feel welcome. Come, we must meet them properly. We must teach them your names. Right then. Now, I want you to meet my two lovely friends. These animals are called Todons. They live in this glen, and they work for me. They will look after you as long as you stay here." The two Todons grinned and bowed to the fuzzbuzzes. The snagron nodded towards the bigger Todon. "His name is Croaker," she said, "and he's a mean, nasty animal, so you'd better not make him angry." Now she looked at the smaller Todon. "He is called Squealer," she said, "and he is hungry all the time. He never gets enough to eat. Don't upset him, or else he'll gobble you up." The two Todons were hopping and jumping around. They couldn't wait to get their hands on the three quivering fuzzbuzzes. "Now then," said the snagron happily, "you are going to stay here for a little holiday, and my two Todons will look after you."
"Hooray!"
shouted Croaker.
"Can we play with them? Can we stretch their scrawny necks? Can we make them squeal and squirm? Can we feed them to the beetles and cockroaches? Can we start now?"
Squealer licked his lips.
"Yes, yes,"
he said eagerly.
"Can we roast them and eat them? They'll make a lovely meal."
"Not yet," said the snagron firmly. "We must catch the others first. But when we have caught them all, I will give you these two. You can have them to play with." Bowing their heads, the Todons waited for the snagron's next order. "Grab these idiots and march them down to the pool," commanded the snagron. Jock and Tosh were grabbed by hands of steel and marched away. The snagron turned to Don. "Stand well back from the mouth of the cave," she ordered. Don crept back into the darkness. Arching her neck, the snagron looked at the curling branches of the twisted tree. Her tongue flicked out, her eyes sparkled, and a soft, murmuring sound came from deep within her throat. A sweet singing sound drifted across the glen. The tree began to sway. Now the snagron started to growl. She raised her head, and jagged flashes of blue and orange light came shooting out of her eyes. Once again, the tree seemed to crackle and burn. Very slowly, the twisted branches began to uncurl. At last they had moved far enough apart to make an archway into the cave. The Snagron looked down on the Toadons. "Put your two friends into jail," she growled. The Toadons dragged Jock and Tosh up to the mouth of the cave. The two fuzzbuzzes could see that the tree still seemed to be burning, but they couldn't feel any heat at all. Quickly, the Toadons pushed them into the cave. The Snagron stopped growling. Now the branches curled back round each other, sealing the doorway so that no one could get out. The Snagron chuckled. "You are fools, and I'm far too clever for you," she said boastfully. "Now, I've got 3 of you for bait. The others will come looking for you, and I will catch them all. My plan cannot fail, and you are powerless to stop me. I am the queen, and I make all the rules in this glen. My word is law here. I'm a powerful ruler, and I'm much too smart to be beaten by you and your clan. Have a good time in there." She turned back to the Toadons. "I'm going to have a rest now," she said. "You two must stand at the mouth of the cave and make sure that they don't get away. Do you hear?"
Yes, Your Majesty,
said Croaker.
"Come on, Squealer, let's get to work."
And the two Toadons stood like jailers, one at each side of the cave. Inside the cave, the 3 fuzzbuzzes sat in a huddle. They were cold and hungry and very, very miserable. No one said anything. There was nothing to say. They knew that they were caught like rats in a trap, and there was nothing they could do about it. Presently they heard Croaker and Squealer whispering to each other. The Toadons had stayed quiet for a long time because they didn't want to disturb the Snagron, but now they were sure that the Snagron must have gone to sleep. Croaker was thinking about what he would do to the prisoners when his turn came to torment them.
"They have played right into our hands,"
he whispered to Squealer.
"We've caught them as easily as a fish on a hook, and soon we'll be able to make them pay for coming into our glen."
Squealer was squirming with happiness.
"Ooh, yes! We'll soon have them begging us to let them go,"
he boasted. Back inside the cave, the 3 friends quivered and trembled as they heard what the Toadons were saying. At last, Don had had enough. Jumping up, he rushed to the mouth of the cave and shook the twisted branches.
"You cowardly murderers!"
he bawled out.
"You wouldn't lay a finger on us if the rest of the clan were here."
Croaker turned to look at him. His eyes gleamed wickedly.
"Shut your mouth, you little squirt," he hissed. "Who says I'm a murderer? I'll make you pay 13 times over for saying that. We have ways of dealing with feeble little weaklings like you. Would you like us to start on you now? I'm sure Squealer would love to pay you back for saying he's a murderer."
Don gulped and stepped back. He knew he had gone too far. He didn't want to give the Toadons a reason for attacking them.
"I'm sorry.
he mumbled softly.
I didn't mean to make you angry."
"That's better,"
said Croaker with a grin.
"Now you just stay there like a good boy and keep quiet."
"We don't want disturbing again."
Don crept back to the others and sat down.
You bird brain,
Whispered Tosh.
I thought they were going to kill you then.
Jock pretended to yawn.
Let's try and get some sleep,
he said.
Perhaps we'll be able to think of a way out of this mess in the morning.
Don and Tosh shut their eyes. Jock put his arms round them. He prayed that the Todons wouldn't come sneaking into the cave in the middle of the night and murder them in their sleep.
I won't go to sleep at all,
he said to himself.
I'll keep on the lookout and make sure that the others get a good night's rest. Who knows, I may be able to think of a way out of here.
He leaned back against the rocky wall and looked out into the murky darkness. He could just see Croaker and Squealer looking in at him.
Good night, jailbirds,
hissed Croaker.
Sleep well. Sweet dreams,
whispered Squealer.
See you in the morning.
Jock groaned.
I must think of something before dawn, or we'll all be for it,
he said to himself.
But I've got a horrible feeling that getting out of here is going to be a long, hard struggle.
Outside in the glen, thick black clouds came swirling across the sky. Before long, the moon and stars had vanished. Inside the cave, it was as black as coal. Jock shivered. He knew it was going to be a long, sleepless night. Read these questions and then write your answers neatly. Do not forget where to put capital letters and full stops. Question 1. What was the cockerel doing? Question 2. How did Windbag get everyone out of bed? Question 3. How did MacFuzz check on who was missing? Question 4. What did Tosh think that they should do? Question 5. Why did the clan draw straws? Question 6. Jock put lots of things in his pocket. If you were going to the Glen of Gloom, what would you want to carry with you? Think of as many useful things as you can, then draw them. Question 7. Why did Tosh and Jock think that the cave had vanished? Question 8. Where did the Todons come from? Question 9. Which Todon is hungry all the time? Question 10. Draw the bit of the story that you like best.